Hi, I'm John Atack.
I'm Sonny Atack.
And we are going to talk about the blues.
Yeah.
Blues. Way down, dirty blues.
Okay.
In the words of Robert Johnson. The term the blues is an Elizabethan phrase.
Huh?
In full, it is the Blue Devils. And when one has the Blue Devils, one is not very happy. And one can understand that being a black person in the United States of America in the teens of the 20th century, it would be quite easy to be not very happy.
Yes.
Given the severity of the work and the nastiness generally. There's this peculiar moment. It's said that W.C. Handy was the first to put the term into the language when in 1900 he heard a girl singing at a railway station and asked what she was singing, and she said the blues. Here is a little historical note that in the early 1880s, a man who was christened Fritz and changed his name to Frederick, Delius, who was, despite his funny name, actually grew up, I think, in Manchester or somewhere in the north of England, but with German parents. He was sent to be the overseer of an orange plantation in Florida. And while he was there in the evening, he heard the black workers singing spirituals. This determined him to become a composer. So black music has had profound effects. We don't really know where the blues came from. There are all sorts of arguments. Alan Lomax, The Land Where the Blues Began, gives a pretty good set of arguments. And the idea is that when the Mississippi Levee was being built, and I believe the Mississippi Levee is the largest engineering work on the planet. I think it's bigger than the Great Wall of China.
It can be seen from space.
It can be seen.
Unlike the Great Wall of China.
I can't see the Great Wall of China. We've gone too far.
Yeah.
And, of course, immortalised by Led Zeppelin in the song When the Levee Breaks, which, of course, it did and does from time to time. Yeah. The idea of the Mississippi Levee was basically to straighten the Mississippi River because it was quite wandering around too much, and you can't have rivers doing that. So the building of the Mississippi Levee, this is astonishing piece of work. Originally, there were Irish navigators working on it and Irish mule skinners. That's a horrible word, isn't it? But they're actually mule drivers. They're people who get mules to work. And it was allegedly found that black mule skinners were able to do more work. They were able to get their mules to cooperate more. And the way they did this was by singing to them. So this is one of the possible routes towards the blues. You also have what are called field hollers. Gonna jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale a day. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale of cotton. Where you're creating a rhythm with which people can damage their hands very badly picking cotton bolls, which are very prickly and horrible, and putting them in the big sacks behind them. So you basically have a people who are pretty thoroughly oppressed, who have had to hide their music, apart from, is it Congo Square in New Orleans, where on a Sunday black slaves were allowed to gather and play drums. But the African polyrhythms, Western music is largely based on polyphony, on melodies that are put together and harmonies. African music has very subtle polyrhythms in it, these different rhythms coming together and being played around each other. And this is certainly one of the origins of the blues. There is the idea that the mule skinners took their music from somewhere in the Nile Delta. There are all sorts of ideas, but we don't really know. What we do know is that a man called Charley Patton, who was, I think, on Stovall's plantation, and I'm going to have to correct this in the description if I've got it wrong. Oh no, not again. He learns to play the guitar from a guy who has disappeared from history. It's called Harry something or other. And he, in terms of polyrhythms, he is able, when you listen to his tracks, or on the bow weevil, for example, which preyed upon the cotton, that he was able to play in a rhythm, to then have peculiar bar lengths, like not 12 bars but 13 and things like that, and then be singing so that there'd actually be 3 rhythms within the piece. It's interesting to note also that he is not an African American as such. He was actually of part African American and part Native American descent. So the blues, at its fount, the guitar blues, has a man who is mixed race, who will have the blood of Europeans, Africans, and Native Americans in him. And this fusion will, I think, become very important 50 years on. He's very apprehensive about recording, so one of the people he taught, Tommy Johnson, is said to be the first person to record a guitar blues. On the same plantation, we also find Son House, and that's Son, S-O-N. His track Death Letter, you can find video of him playing it, and it is on a National Steel guitar, and it is, I always use an example when people are saying, well, this guitar player is better than that guitar player because he can do this, and you go, well, go and listen to Son House, he can't play the guitar at all, and you tell me if you weren't pinned by the emotional expression, which is what's actually important in the music. Technique is great, but once it doesn't have any emotional expression anymore, it's worthless as far as I'm concerned. But you do get musicians like John McLaughlin or Itzhak Perlman who have incredible technique and incredible emotional expression. You also have, you have Charley Patton, Son House, Tommy Johnson, the man who would later be called Howlin Wolf, Chester Burnett, and Robert Johnson, all in the same place, in what's called the Mississippi Delta, which is actually 400 miles north of the point where the Mississippi goes out into the... where does it go? It's the Gulf of Mexico, or... I'm not very good at geography. I'm sure Spike will put me right. But when the Mississippi Delta reaches the sea, they're 400 miles north of it on this plantation. Out of this will also come the Chatmon brothers, 2 of whom will form the Mississippi Shakes, named after the movie The Sheikh of Araby, with Rudolph Valentino in. He's popular. Let's call the band. Let's say we're from Arabia. Yeah. And they have one of the biggest hits of race records with a track called Sitting on Top of the World. And it's well worth finding their version of it. It's rather great. And then go and listen to Cream playing it on Goodbye Cream, the live version of Sitting on Top of the World, where Mr. Eric Clapton performed miracles, as do Bruce and Baker. Incredible. But it took me years to work out what the words were, because Jack Bruce really sings in Glaswegian half the time. Had to take my Christmas. Had to take my Christmas in my overalls. Gone, but I don't worry because I'm sitting on top of the world. There's another Chatmon brother who went under the name Memphis Slim, and he's in the other lineage for me. There are 2 lineages. There's the guitar blues and there's the piano blues. And I know a lot more about the guitar blues than I do about the piano blues. But when it comes to piano, you'll then get Big Maceo Merriweather, and Otis Spann, who is Muddy Waters piano player. They are well worth searching out too. And so this music develops. You have to understand that these are not celebrities. This is not like K-pop. Robert Johnson is said to have afforded a Model T Ford. No. Afforded a Ford. And he Forded Fords with the Ford after he'd afforded it.
How did he do that?
You drive across the Fords.
Okay. Yeah.
In the streams.
Okay, cool.
Robert Johnson has an album called The King of the Delta Blues. There's a kind of mythology around Johnson, much of it mythological. But it is said he was murdered by a jealous husband because he had a bit of a habit of sleeping with ladies. There is a terrible documentary, I can't remember which one it is, which has an absolutely nonsensical idea of him going to the crossroads and having his guitar tuned by the devil, and then he could play it afterwards. This story actually originated with Tommy Johnson, who's no relation. You've also got Lonnie Johnson, the astonishing.
Crossroads.
I'm not sure. There are two documentaries, and one of them, I don't want to slag off the good one.
Oh yeah, of course.
By mistake.
Yeah.
But although they have musicologists talking in it, I'm pretty sure they had nothing to do with editing it.
Yeah.
Because what's said is ultimately untrue. But Robert Johnson, the story is that he was a kid. He hung around with Charley Patton, and therefore Son House, Howlin Wolf, and Tommy Johnson, and he'd pick up one of their guitars whenever he could, and he was rubbish. And then he went off for people say different periods, a year to 18 months. And when he came back, he was the most phenomenal guitar player the world had ever known. In the form, of course, you still have other guitar players like Segovia who were playing in another form. But for the blues, Robert Johnson inspired Eric Clapton and Peter Green, the founder of Fleetwood Mac. Both of them produced whole albums which are copies of Robert Johnson. I absolutely recommend the last remastering, which I think was in 2011, of Johnson's complete works. He only recorded twice, sessions in sitting in the corner of a hotel room in Texas, and you can hear the traffic going by. And
that's the effect.
There's just something quite magical about Johnson. His songs have been performed by many people. Love in Vain, for example, by the Rolling Stones. That's a Johnson song. Crossroads, Rambling on My Mind by Cream. He's really something. But he wasn't the influence that is suggested, because the King of the Delta Blues album came out in the mid-60s. And only somebody who was going around getting the old songs would have known him. So in Chicago, we have this thing where there's a great migration because of the poverty and the awful sharecropping system in the South, where you might work for the whole year and end up only earning $5 because of the corruption of the system. So many black people very sensibly went and they worked on the killing floors. It was years before I understood where Led Zeppelin had got this term killing floor from, but a killing floor is an abattoir or slaughterhouse. And they worked on the car assembly lines, and they could earn reasonable money doing this. And they needed music. And as you went up, through the cities, Memphis is on the way. You get up to Chicago eventually, and in each city, a blues developed. So in Chicago, I'd recommend the work of Big Bill Broonzy, and the work of Sonny Boy Williamson. And we have to make a point here. There are two people called Sonny Boy Williamson. The first of them is from Jackson, Tennessee, and during the 1930s was one of the biggest sellers of race records, as they're called. He was making a reasonable living. His name was stolen by a man who actually performed under the name Little Boy Blue, and whose name was Rice Miller. And it happened accidentally. He was performing on the radio, and the guy running the radio show went, who's the most famous blues singer? It's Sonny Boy Williamson. We'll call him that. Right. So he just stole the name. Okay. They were quite different men. They produced quite different music. And Sonny Boy the First said he was going to kill Sonny Boy the Second when he found him. But sadly, Sonny Boy the First was beaten to death in a street fight, I think in 1948. And so, but it's good because it meant that the other Sonny Boy, although he was, as John Mayall said, a mean old man, and noted for being able to put a harmonica inside his mouth and play it, and drink a bottle of whiskey in one gulp, he did produce some great music. And you have then suddenly the birth of the electric blues. The electric guitar has started being used in the late 1930s. You have Charlie Christian, one of the founders of bebop, who sadly dies at the age of 21, having worked with Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Bird Parker to create this astonishingly complex virtuoso music, which will become bebop. You have Oscar Moore, who plays in the Nat King Cole Trio, that original Nat King Cole Trio in the 40s. Everything they did is wonderful. Just three guys. And you get to find Nat King Cole astonishing piano player as well as having one of the great voices. But also as Muddy Waters and Hubert Sumlin. Sumlin will play with Howlin' Wolf and beg Muddy Waters to take him into his band because Howlin' Wolf was a little bit violent and very big. But you'll have these legends. Muddy Waters, called Muddy Waters because his grandma, when he was a little boy, called him Mud because he was always covered in mud. And he originally performed as Muddy Water, and then somebody mistakenly put an S on it, and he liked it. One of the things that's, I'm a man, spell it M-A-N. One of the things you have to know is that he couldn't read and write. It's also a bit mean to women, which we don't approve of. But, Muddy Waters is a place you go if you want to hear the electric blues. And everything from the original recordings that are made of him, I think Alan Lomax made them, back in 1942, and they're called the Plantation recordings. And you hear him performing on acoustic guitar, the blues tradition, these perfect songs. It then takes another 6 years before he can get to Chicago and start recording there at Leonard Chess's studio. And there are a lot of stories about the exploitation of people by Leonard Chess. And
did Muddy Waters get his wife to write down the songs?
Yeah, he'd wake up in the middle of the night and he'd say, "I've got a song," and she'd have to write it down because he couldn't. So it's a sleepless life. But there are great songs like "I'm Ready" is a song that he co-wrote with Willie Dixon, to whom most blues songs are credited, because when copyright law came around, very late in the US, Dixon was sensible enough to grab every traditional blues song he could. But he also wrote a lot of songs. So Spoonful, wonderful song Spoonful, which Howlin' Wolf did a great version of, is attributed to Willie Dixon, but it might be older. If Leonard Chess had known what he was up to, he'd have gone and registered the copyright in them, because that's the sort of man he was. But they produced a remarkable oeuvre of music, which is very successful. The first hit, I think, is "Can't Be Satisfied," where you've just got this twangy slide guitar that Muddy Waters plays and a bass player, perhaps Willie Dixon, and that's it. And it works so beautifully. Then he puts a band together with, I think, S.P. Leary playing drums, Little Walter playing harmonica, and Jimmy Rogers playing guitar, and with Muddy himself playing slide guitar. And they do lots of wonderful things. The band evolves. He lets everybody in the band record as leader, so Otis Spann, the piano player, their albums, which is the Muddy Waters band with him singing. Then Little Walter records Duke and My Babe, and while they're on tour, these become hits. And so he leaves and goes off and drinks himself to death. And so Big Walter, how are you going to replace Little Walter? Well, you need Big Walter Horton, because he's bigger. Yeah. But the Waters band, you can catch them at almost any point. And there are some more obscure records like Muddy Waters' Woodstock album, which is not a recording made at the Woodstock Festival. It's made in Woodstock and is a very good album. But perhaps the classic, which I'd recommend, is actually without him playing guitar. It's Johnny Winters playing guitar, slide guitar, and the album is called Hard Again. And will he work out what he's talking about there? Yeah. Again, the early Howlin' Wolf albums are well worth listening to, and Sonny Boy Williamson. Let's not get into any more complexity at this point. We'll talk about blues rock and the development of R&B and other forms along the way. But great music, wonderful music, and an absolute demonstration of the prowess of African Americans, and a reason why we should celebrate their addition to our culture through blues, through jazz, and indeed through poetry, people like Langston Hughes. Yeah. And we have enjoyed your company today. We thank you very much. I am John Atack.
I'm Sammy Tack.
Thank you. Blues. Way down, dirty blues.